On Mother's Day, my daughter sent me a mysterious gift box, and what was inside almost sent me to the hospital, so I gave her the lesson she deserved. My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and I never thought I'd kick my own daughter out of my house. But that March afternoon in Denver, my limits were completely crossed. Rebecca arrived with Mark around 3 o'clock, walking in without properly knocking like she always did. At 32, my eldest daughter had developed an impressive ability to make me feel guilty about things that weren't even my responsibility. "Mom, we need to talk about Grandma's inheritance," she said without preamble. Throwing herself onto the beige living room sofa, Mark positioned himself behind her, arms crossed, forming a united front that immediately put me on the defensive. David lowered his Denver Post newspaper, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. After 40 years of marriage, my husband knew that tone in Rebecca's voice better than I'd like. It was the same tone she used when at 16 she convinced us to take out a $12,000 loan for her first car, promising to pay it back with money from her part-time mall job that she quit 3 weeks later. "Rebecca, you know your grandmother specified in the will that the money would stay locked until you turned 35, I replied, trying to keep my voice balanced. She had her reasons for that decision. Mark leaned forward with that fake smile he always wore when he wanted something important. But that was written over 10 years ago. Margaret, circumstances have changed drastically. We have 2 children to raise, the mortgage on the 4-bedroom house we bought last year, private school costs for the boys. Costs you chose to take on, David murmured loud enough for everyone to hear. Rebecca's face transformed instantly. It was like watching a person split in half. On one side, the daughter I'd raised with such care. On the other, a stranger I barely recognized, with hard eyes and mouth contracted in a bitter line. "Oh, so that's how it is," she said, her voice rising an octave. "After everything we've done for you, after giving you 2 beautiful grandchildren that you love more than anything in the world." There was the first card on the table. Rebecca knew exactly where to hit me where it hurt most. Ethan and Oliver, my 6-year-old twin grandsons, were literally the light of my life. Every weekend they came here, and I'd take them to Washington Park. We'd make dinosaur-shaped, chocolate cookies, watch Disney Channel cartoons together on the sofa. The mere idea of losing them made me physically sick. "You can't use the boys as bargaining chips, Rebecca," David said, closing the newspaper harder than necessary. "I'm not using anyone as bargaining chips," she retorted, but her eyes gleamed with that cruel satisfaction I'd learned to fear over the years. "I'm just being practical. If you don't care about helping us when we need it most, maybe we should rethink these weekly visits." It was always like this. Rebecca had an almost supernatural ability to find my most vulnerable points and squeeze until I completely gave in. And for years, decades even, I had given in. The car loan became a college loan, which became monthly rent help, which became payment for the house down payment. "You know what kills me?" Mark said, standing up and walking around the room like he owned it. "You've always had obvious favorites. Kevin never had to beg for anything. Always the golden child, right? Engineering degree from University of Colorado. Married to that little princess from San Francisco. Living in California with their fancy tech jobs." My mouth opened in genuine shock. Kevin, my 29-year-old younger son, had moved to the West Coast 5 years ago precisely to escape this toxic family dynamic that Rebecca insisted on perpetuating. "Kevin never asked me for a penny after age 22, I said, my voice coming out firmer than expected. He paid his own $60,000 student loans, bought his own used car, saved money for 3 years for his house down payment." "Because he never had to," Rebecca screamed. "Because you were always easier on him. He could do anything, and you thought it was cute. I had to fight for every crumb of attention." David stood up slowly, his patience clearly reaching its limit. "Rebecca, that's not true, and you know it. Your mother always treated you both equally." "Oh, really?" She laughed bitterly. "Then explain why when I needed help with the house down payment, you made a $20,000 loan with interest, but when Kevin wanted that Europe backpacking trip after graduation, you just gave him the money." I was speechless. "Rebecca, you were 26 buying property. Kevin was 22 and the trip cost $1,200. And you never paid back the $20,000 because you knew it would be impossible with my substitute teacher salary." Mark put his hand on his wife's shoulder, not to calm her but to support her. "Look, let's be completely direct here. You're almost 60. You're not taking this money to the grave. Rebecca is your legitimate daughter. Has moral right to this inheritance, and we need it now. It's that simple." "That simple?" David repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You want us to ignore her mother's express wishes so you can continue living completely beyond your means?" Rebecca turned to me with tears. "Mom, please. You know, I'd never ask if it wasn't really necessary, but the boys' private school raised tuition to $2,000 each per month. Mark's having difficulties in sales, and we really need this security. Just advance it by 2.5 years. I looked at my eldest daughter and for a moment saw the 5-year-old who used to sit on my lap for princess stories. But then I remembered all the other times. The automatic $2,800 that left our account monthly without question. "No," I said. The word came out so low that for a moment I thought no one heard, but the absolute silence that followed confirmed they had. "What do you mean no?" Rebecca asked. "I won't touch your grandmother's inheritance. She left clear instructions, and I'm going to respect them." Mark's face turned red. "You know what? We always knew you don't really care about us as family. This is exactly the proof I needed." "Don't start," David said. "No, let me speak the truth. You talk about family, unconditional love, but when it's time to really help, where are you? Hiding behind a dead old woman's will." something inside me completely broke. Maybe it was how disrespectfully he referred to my mother. Maybe it was realizing my daughter had married someone who thought disrespecting my family in my own house was acceptable. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice clearer than it had sounded in years. Rebecca stopped crying instantly. "Mom, you can't be serious," I said. "Get out of my house immediately." "You can't be serious about this," Mark said, but was already backing toward the door. "I'm more serious than I've ever been in my entire life, and until you learn to treat me with basic respect, you're not welcome here." Rebecca looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, genuine shock, deep anger, and something that seemed almost like real fear. "And the boys?" she asked, playing her last card. My heart tightened painfully. "The boys will always be welcome, but you two won't, while you continue acting like I owe you something." They left in silence. The sound of the wooden door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. David came and hugged me tight, and only then did I realize I was trembling uncontrollably. "You did the right thing," he murmured in my ear. But standing there in my completely empty and silent living room, I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing or just destroyed my family forever. The days following that emotional explosion were the quietest our house had known in years. David tried to distract me with backyard garden projects and trips to Park Meadows Mall, but we both knew we were just carefully avoiding talking about the elephant in the room, or rather about the total absence of the elephant. Because for the first time in over 2 decades, Rebecca wasn't obsessively calling 3 times a day with some fabricated financial emergency. The house seemed strangely empty without the constant chaos. It was strange how silence could be simultaneously comforting and deafening. Sitting in the kitchen on a sunny Thursday morning, having my breakfast alone while David took his daily 5-mile walk through the neighborhood, I finally began to seriously think about the last 20 years of my life as a mother. When exactly had everything started to unravel? At what precise moment did I become the person who always gave in, always found a convincing excuse, always opened the wallet without questioning? I vividly remembered Rebecca at 12 when she absolutely needed those specific $120 Nike shoes because all the popular girls at school had identical ones. At that time, $120 represented a small fortune for our middle-class family, but she cried so much, begged so dramatically, made me feel so guilty for being a mother who didn't care about her daughter's social happiness that I ended up buying them on credit in 6 installments. Kevin, who was only 9 at the time, had never made even remotely similar requests. When he needed new shoes, he'd happily go with me to Target and choose any that fit well and cost less than $40. It should have been a flashing red warning sign, but at the time, I genuinely thought Rebecca just had a more expressive personality, that she felt things more deeply, that she needed more reassurance. The painful truth is that I had created an emotional monster, and for decades I fed that monster with my own desperate need to be seen as the perfect mother. The phone rang. It was Sandra, my best friend since community college. "How are you feeling after everything?" she asked without preamble. Honestly, completely confused and guilty and relieved and very afraid. "Welcome to the club of mothers who finally said no. Remember when I had to cut Jessica's allowance because she was buying alcohol for underage friends? She didn't speak to me for 2 months." Jessica was Sandra's daughter, same age as Rebecca. But unlike my daughter, Jessica had learned through real consequences that she couldn't manipulate her parents indefinitely and today maintained a healthy adult relationship with them. "But Sandra, what if I really lose the boys because of this?" "Honey, you're not losing those boys. Rebecca may be many bad things, but she's not stupid. She knows you and David are by far the best grandparents those children could have. She might try to use it as emotional bargaining for a while, but deep down she needs you much more than you need her." After an hour of talking, I felt considerably better. Sandra was right about one fundamental thing. Rebecca always came back eventually, always. Because ultimately, David and I were her most reliable financial and emotional safety net. But this time would be completely different. This time, I wouldn't automatically give in just because she showed up with red eyes from crying or threatened to keep me away from the grandchildren. This time, I would maintain my position firmly. What I had no idea about was that Rebecca was already secretly planning something much more sinister than emotional manipulation. Mother's Day arrived on a sunny, seemingly perfect May morning, exactly 3 weeks after that devastating fight. David was in the kitchen preparing his famous blueberry pancakes, our sacred Sunday tradition for over 15 years, when we distinctly heard the sound of a delivery truck stopping directly in front of our house. "Special delivery!" shouted the young delivery man, energetically knocking on the front door with an insistence that made me immediately get up from the breakfast table. My heart raced instantly. It was Sunday morning, and Sunday deliveries always required advanced payment with extra fees. This meant someone had meticulously planned for this package to arrive specifically today on Mother's Day, paying considerable additional costs. David went to the front door and returned carefully, carrying a common brown cardboard box approximately the size of a women's shoebox, but noticeably heavier than its size suggested. My name was handwritten in cursive on the address label. Margaret Chen, my maiden name that only very close family members knew, and there was absolutely no clear sender identification anywhere. "Don't open this box," David said immediately, placing it with extreme care on the wooden kitchen table, as if he were handling an active bomb. "Why not?" I asked, although my maternal instinct was already screaming internally the same urgent recommendation. "Look here carefully," he said, pointing with his finger to small circular holes strategically drilled in the sides of the box. "Ventilation holes. There's definitely something alive inside this box." We stood completely motionless. looking at the cardboard box as if it could literally explode at any moment. And considering our current family situation, maybe it could be exactly that. An emotional bomb waiting to detonate. Do you think it's... I began hesitantly. Something Rebecca sent? David finished my sentence, his voice loaded with an apprehension I rarely heard. It has to be related to her. At that exact moment, as if responding directly to our tense conversation, we heard a subtle but unmistakable sound coming from inside the closed box, a definitive movement like something deliberately dragging against the internal cardboard, followed by an almost imperceptible scratching. David immediately grabbed the kitchen phone. Hello, 911. I need to report an extremely suspicious delivery. We firmly believe there's some type of animal, possibly dangerous, inside a box that was delivered to our property this morning. 20 minutes later, our quiet Sunday morning had completely transformed into a scene from a suspense movie. 2 uniformed police officers, an experienced wildlife control specialist, and 3 extremely curious neighbors were gathered on our covered porch, all looking at the apparently innocent cardboard box as if it contained a nuclear bomb. Mrs. Chen, said Officer Martinez, a middle-aged Hispanic man with a posture that immediately inspired confidence and security. Do you have any specific idea who might have sent this particular package? I hesitated for a long moment. A significant part of me still categorically refused to believe that my own daughter would be genuinely capable of something so extreme and potentially dangerous. But David gave me a deeply encouraging look, and I knew instinctively that I could no longer protect Rebecca from the direct consequences of her own actions. I sincerely believe it was my eldest daughter, I said, my voice coming out considerably firmer and more determined than I expected. We had a very serious family discussion a few weeks ago, and I recently found a suspicious financial charge on my credit card statement from a store specializing in exotic reptiles. Jake Morrison, the wildlife specialist, who appeared to be no more than 25 years old but spoke with the absolute authority of someone who professionally dealt with dangerous creatures every day, approached the box carrying specialized equipment I didn't even know existed. I'm going to open this box with extreme care and maximum precaution, he explained methodically, putting on thick leather gloves that went up to his elbows and holding a long metal rod with a specialized hook at the tip. If it's really some type of venomous snake, it's probably significantly stressed from the prolonged journey and confinement in a small space, which makes it potentially much more aggressive than it would normally be. What happened in the following minutes was something I'll never be able to forget for the rest of my life, no matter how much I try. Jake carefully cut the brown duct tape sealing the box and lifted one of the cardboard flaps with extremely deliberate and controlled movements. Immediately, a small but distinctively colored head appeared. Red, black, and yellow stripes in a geometric pattern I vaguely recognized from Discovery Channel documentaries, as characteristic of extremely venomous snakes. Jesus Christ Almighty, Officer Martinez murmured quietly. It's completely real and alive. Jake, demonstrating precise and careful movements that spoke of years of professional experience, managed to capture the snake with his specialized equipment and immediately transfer it to a thick glass container specially designed for safe containment. The snake wasn't particularly large, maybe 60 centimeters in total length, but its mere presence there on my porch was absolutely terrifying. Legitimate, adult coral snake, Jake confirmed with absolute authority, examining the animal through the safe glass. Healthy, well-fed, and extremely venomous. A single bite from this animal could easily kill an adult person, especially someone your age, if they didn't receive immediate specialized medical treatment. I felt my legs trembling uncontrollably. I had to sit immediately in the wicker porch chair, desperately trying to process the terrifying reality that if David hadn't noticed the ventilation holes, if I had opened the box alone, as I automatically did with all other packages that arrived here, I could be dead at that exact moment. We're going to need a complete and detailed police report, said Officer Martinez. Seriously. And we're going to thoroughly investigate the exact origin of this delivery. If someone really sent this intentionally, we're definitely talking about qualified attempted murder. The younger officer, who had remained silent until then, added, the prepaid Sunday delivery, the strategically drilled breathing holes, the use of the recipient's maiden name. All of this indicates deliberate premeditation and specific knowledge about transporting dangerous reptiles. After all the professionals left, taking the snake as evidence, and the house finally returned to its familiar silence, David and I sat in the living room trying to completely assimilate what had just happened in our lives. She really did this, I said out loud for the first time, finally accepting the incontestable reality. Our daughter genuinely tried to kill me. David came to sit directly beside me on the sofa and hugged me tight. Margaret, what do you want to do now? I thought about 6-year-old Rebecca pedaling her pink bike with training wheels in our backyard. About 12-year-old Rebecca crying inconsolably on my shoulder when the popular schoolgirls were deliberately cruel to her. About 22-year-old Rebecca calling me excitedly at 2 in the morning to tell me Mark had finally proposed. And then I thought about 32-year-old Rebecca meticulously researching venomous snakes, buying one online, carefully organizing shipment to my house because I had dared to say no to her financial whims. I'm going to call her right now, I decided with absolute determination. I'm going to give her one single chance to personally explain to me what the hell she was thinking when she did this. I picked up the cordless living room phone with hands still slightly trembling and dialed the familiar number I knew by heart. Rebecca answered on the 3rd ring, her voice sounding genuinely surprised and even a little cautious. Mom, she said, and I could detect real hesitation in her voice. I didn't expect you to call, especially today. Rebecca, I began carefully, trying to keep my voice controlled and not reveal what I had discovered yet. I need to ask you something specific, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Mom, she responded, but I could detect growing caution in her tone. Did you send me anything today? Any kind of special Mother's Day gift? There was a pause that lasted too long to be natural, a pause that told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth again. Why are you asking that specifically? She finally responded, completely avoiding giving a direct answer. Because I just had to call police and animal control to remove a venomous coral snake from my porch, I said, my voice becoming progressively louder and firmer with each word. A snake that was purchased, with my credit card at a store in Aurora, exactly 2 weeks ago. I heard a distinctive noise in the background of the phone line. It sounded unmistakably like someone was laughing loudly. Rebecca, is someone there with you right now? It's just Mark, she said quickly, trying to sound casual. He's watching the game on TV. But I knew Mark's characteristic laugh perfectly after years. And that definitely wasn't the laugh of someone watching something funny on a sports program. It was the cruel laugh of someone who found something hilarious, something they had just heard from our conversation. Put it on speakerphone now, I requested firmly. Mom, I really don't think... Put it on speakerphone, Rebecca. Immediately, I heard the characteristic click of the phone changing modes. Hi, Margaret, Mark said, and I could hear the malicious smile in his voice. How was your special Mother's Day gift? We hope it was exciting. There was the definitive confirmation I didn't want but needed to hear. You two are genuinely sick, I said, my voice coming out colder than I'd ever heard from my own mouth. You sent a potentially lethal snake to me because I refused to give money that isn't even technically mine? Oh, please, Rebecca said. And her voice had changed completely. There was no more pretending, no more the loving daughter trying to convince me of something. It was just a harmless little Mother's Day prank. You've always been too dramatic for simple situations. Prank. My own daughter had called an attempted murder a harmless prank, a prank that could have killed me, I replied, trying to keep my voice firm. Well, Mark said with casual cruelty that chilled me to the bone. Maybe next time you'll think twice before turning your back on your own family. I hung up immediately. I sat in complete silence for a long time, processing not just what had happened, but what it meant for our family's future. Rebecca hadn't sent the snake in a moment of impulsive, temporary anger. She had meticulously planned this. She had researched, purchased, organized delivery for a specific day loaded with symbolism. And when directly confronted, she hadn't shown even a hint of genuine remorse. Worse yet, she and Mark found the entire situation genuinely funny. David came to sit beside me on the sofa. What did they say? I told him about the entire conversation, about Mark's cruel laughter, about Rebecca calling attempted murder a prank, about the total lack of remorse or responsibility. It's completely over, I said with a finality that surprised even myself. I'm not going to try to save her from herself anymore. I'm not going to pretend it's just a phase or that she doesn't understand the consequences of her actions. It's over. The next morning, Monday, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. I showered, dressed carefully, and drove to First National Bank, where David and I had maintained our accounts for over 20 years. I need to remove my daughter as an authorized user on all our credit cards, I informed the manager, Mr. Peterson, a kind man who had known our family for decades. Are you sure, Mrs. Chen? That's quite a significant change. I'm absolutely certain. Next, I canceled all automatic payments we made related to Rebecca's financial life. The monthly payment of $450 for her Honda Civic, the automatic transfer of $2,800 that happened religiously every 5th of each month for over 3 years. 30 complete years of progressive financial dependence systematically cut in a single productive morning. I should have done this at least 2 decades ago. When I got home, David was in the office paying some bills online. How did it go? Liberating, I replied honestly. For the first time in years, I feel like I have control over my own financial life. That afternoon, I went to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of the old dresser where I kept important documents. There was the April credit card statement, which I had specifically kept to investigate later. Line by line, I reviewed each charge until I found what I was looking for. Aurora Exotic Reptiles, $347.89, April 15th. I picked up the phone and called the store again. Aurora Exotic Reptiles, good afternoon, answered the same young, enthusiastic voice as before. Hi, I'm calling about a purchase made on the card ending in 4829 on April 15th. I'd like some specific details about what was acquired. Let me check. Oh yes, I found the complete record. It was an adult female coral snake, specialized terrarium substrate, a professional transport box with ventilation system, and shipping preparation fee. The snake was sent as a gift, according to specific buyer instructions. And who made the purchase? The name on the card is Margaret Chen, but who came to the store in person was a younger woman who said she was your daughter. She knew many specific details about venomous snakes, asked specifically about toxicity levels, victim survival time, poisoning symptoms. She seemed to know exactly what she wanted. My blood completely froze. Rebecca hadn't bought the snake impulsively. She had meticulously researched how lethal it would be. Thank you for the information, I murmured, hanging up with trembling hands. David appeared in the bedroom doorway. Did you discover something new? I told him about the call. About Rebecca going to the store personally, about the specific questions regarding toxicity and lethality. She knew exactly what she was doing, David said grimly. This wasn't a prank or an impulsive act. It was premeditated attempted murder. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 2 days after I had systematically cut all financial support. It was exactly 9:15, and I was in the backyard trying to keep myself mentally occupied by pulling weeds from the petunia beds. "You did what?" Rebecca screamed before I could even say hello, her voice loaded with a fury I had rarely heard. "I imagine you just discovered about the credit cards and transfers," I replied calmly. "I found out when my card was completely declined at King Soopers in front of everyone," she yelled with an intensity that made me hold the phone away from my ear. I looked like a complete idiot. I had to abandon a cart full of groceries for the entire week and leave humiliated. I felt a pang of something that could have been maternal guilt a few days ago, but after nearly being bitten by a venomous coral snake deliberately sent by my own daughter, my capacity to feel sorry for Rebecca's small public humiliations had disappeared completely and definitively. "Rebecca, you're 32 years old and have 2 stable jobs. You and Mark together earn over $90,000 annually," I replied with objective facts. "You should be able to buy basic groceries without financially depending on your retired parents' credit card. It's not about the money itself," she screamed, but we both knew it was exactly and exclusively about the money. "It's about you completely abandoning us when we need you most. It's about you choosing Grandma's dead papers over your own living daughter. It's about you sending me a venomous snake," I said clearly. And the absolute silence that followed was so long that for a moment I thought she had hung up the phone. "It was just a joke," she finally murmured. But her voice had lost all its previous strength. "Rebecca, do you know exactly what the police officer told me yesterday? That if I had opened that box alone, if the snake had managed to bite me, I would have had at most 2 hours to get to a specialized hospital before dying. 2 hours. And you call that a joke? I didn't know it was that dangerous," she said. But even while speaking, I could clearly hear she was lying shamelessly. "You went personally to the reptile store, Rebecca. They told me you asked specific questions about toxicity, poisoning symptoms, and victim survival time. You knew exactly what you were doing." I heard her start sobbing on the other end of the line, and for a microscopic moment, my maternal heart almost automatically gave in. Almost. But then I vividly remembered the sound of Mark's cruel laughter when he learned I had discovered about the snake, and my determination solidified like concrete. "Mom, please," she begged between sobs that seemed genuine. "I made a terrible and unforgivable mistake. I was so desperately angry. But you can forgive me, can't you? We're family. Family forgives. Family also doesn't try to murder each other. Rebecca, it was a moment of temporary insanity. I would never do something like this again. I swear by everything sacred." "How can I trust you?" I asked directly. "How can I be absolutely certain that next time you get angry with me, you won't do something even worse and more dangerous?" She couldn't formulate an answer to that fundamental question. "The money isn't coming back," I declared with finality. "Monthly transfers, credit card, car payments, everything permanently canceled. You and Mark need to finally learn to live exclusively within your own financial means. What if I go directly to the police and tell them you're lying about the snake?" she said, her voice becoming desperate and simultaneously cruel. "What if I say you're making up this whole story to have a convenient excuse to cut our help?" I genuinely laughed. Really laughed. "Rebecca, there's a complete official police report about removing a venomous coral snake from my property. There's physical evidence of the purchase on my credit card statement with exact date and amount. And there's a digital recording of this entire conversation because I learned to record all our calls after you systematically started denying things you had said." The silence on the other end was absolutely total. "You're recording me now?" she asked, her voice small and scared. "I'm recording all our conversations since last week," I confirmed without hesitation, "including this current one where you just confessed again that you sent the snake and tried to threaten me with lies to the police. You can't use that against me legally. I can and will if you continue threatening or disturbing me. Rebecca, you committed multiple federal crimes. Sending live animals through mail without adequate authorization is completely illegal. Sending venomous animals with intent to cause harm is attempted murder. If you continue threatening me, I'm going to take these recordings and all physical evidence directly to federal prosecutors." "You would turn in your own daughter?" The question hit me like a direct punch to the stomach because the answer was yes, I would turn her in. And the fact that we had reached exactly this point broke my heart in ways I didn't even know were humanly possible. "You're no longer the daughter I raised," I said, and the words came out like a painful confession. "The Rebecca I knew and loved would never try to kill me for money. So tell me honestly, who exactly are you now?" She hung up without answering the question. 3 days later on Friday morning, Rebecca and Mark showed up unexpectedly at my door. I was organizing the kitchen pantry when I saw their familiar silver sedan parking directly in front of our house. My first instinct was to immediately lock all doors and pretend I wasn't home. But then I realized that if I continued running and avoiding direct confrontations, they would never understand that I was completely serious about permanent consequences. I opened the front door before they could knock, maintaining my upright and confident posture. "We need to talk urgently," Mark said without any preamble or basic courtesy. "We have absolutely nothing to talk about," I replied. But let them in anyway. Not because I wanted to, but because I realized this final conversation needed to happen to establish definitive boundaries. They sat on the living room sofa as if they were still completely welcome there. Rebecca seemed to have cried recently. Her eyes were red and swollen, but Mark seemed mainly irritated and impatient. "Look, Margaret," he began, using my name in the authoritative way he always did when he wanted to sound official. "You need to immediately stop this dramatic nonsense. We know you're genuinely upset because of that snake situation, but it's way past time for everyone to be adult and rational about this." "Adult and rational," I repeated, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "Exactly," Rebecca said, leaning forward with a pleading expression. "Mom, I admit it was a stupid and thoughtless idea, but nothing really serious happened. You're perfectly fine, and now you're punishing not just me, but the boys too. They keep constantly asking when they can come see Grandma Margaret." It was absolutely incredible. Even after everything that had happened, after all the irrefutable evidence, they still thought I was the person being irrational and dramatic. "Nothing serious?" I asked incredulously. "Rebecca, you sent me a snake that could have killed me." "But it didn't kill you," Mark said, as if that magically solved everything. "And deep down, you know Rebecca would never do something to really hurt you permanently. It was just a desperate cry for attention." "A cry for attention that cost $347 and violated multiple federal laws?" David said dryly, appearing in the living room doorway. I hadn't heard him come down the stairs. Mark turned to him with masculine superiority. "David, you're a rational man. You understand that sometimes women do emotionally dramatic things when they're psychologically disturbed. Doesn't mean we should completely destroy the family because of an isolated episode." The expression on my husband's face told me immediately that Mark had just made a tremendously grave mistake. "Are you suggesting," David said, his voice becoming dangerously calm, "that I should ignore the fact that someone tried to poison my wife because women are emotionally dramatic?" "It wasn't attempted poisoning," Rebecca said quickly. "It was just fangs with venom. Fangs with enough venom to kill an adult horse," David retorted immediately. Mark stood up abruptly, and suddenly the atmosphere in the room changed completely and dangerously. There was something in his posture, in the way he strategically positioned himself between David and the exit door, that made me feel genuinely frightened for the first time. "Let's stop pretending you're the innocent victims here," he said, his voice becoming lower and simultaneously more threatening. "You two spent entire years promising you'd always be available for family, that we could count on you unconditionally. And now, the first time Rebecca makes a small error in judgment, you brutally cut everything off. That's not how real family works." "Real family doesn't try to murder each other," I said firmly. "Nobody tried to murder anybody," he shouted, completely losing civilized composure. "You're two paranoid old people transforming an unfortunate prank into an elaborate murder conspiracy. Get out of my house immediately," David said with authority. "No," Mark responded defiantly. "We're not leaving until we resolve this definitively. You're going to reactivate all the credit cards, restore the automatic monthly transfers, and permanently stop acting like we're dangerous criminals." "And if we don't?" I asked, although I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Mark smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant or reassuring smile. It was the kind of expression predators make before attacking. "Well, it would be a real shame if something unexpected happened to you two. Two elderly people living alone in this big isolated house. You go out walking religiously every morning at 7, grocery shopping every Wednesday at 2 p.m., bridge club every Thursday at 8 p.m. It would be very easy for someone who knows your predictable routine perfectly well to take advantage of that vulnerability." The blood completely froze in my veins. Mark had just explicitly threatened us, not in a veiled or implicit way. He had literally threatened us with physical violence, specifically mentioning our daily routine as a form of intimidation. David immediately grabbed the phone from the side table. "What are you doing?" Rebecca asked, seeming genuinely scared for the first time. "Calling the police," David replied calmly. "Your husband just explicitly threatened us in our own house." "That wasn't a threat," Mark said quickly, but the panic in his voice completely gave him away. "It was just a general observation about residential security. I'm absolutely certain the police officers will interpret it exactly that way," David said sarcastically, dialing 911. Rebecca quickly stood up and pulled Mark toward the door with visible urgency. "Let's leave now," she said, her voice loaded with real panic. "Let's leave immediately." But Mark resisted her attempt to drag him out. "This isn't over," he said, looking me directly in the eyes with an intensity that made me feel physically threatened. "You can't treat us like this and think there won't be serious consequences." "Get out," I said, my voice coming out stronger and more determined than I actually felt internally. "Get out now, or I'll complete the call to police myself." They finally left, but I could hear Mark shouting vulgar obscenities from outside until their car finally left our street. When silence finally returned to the house, David and I stood in the living room trying to completely process what had just happened. "They directly threatened us," I said, still barely able to believe the reality. "Yes," David confirmed grimly. "And this time, there's absolutely no way to interpret it differently." I picked up my cell phone and started looking for a number in my contacts. "Who are you calling now?" David asked. "Sarah Mitchell," I replied determinedly. "That criminal attorney Sandra recommended last year when the neighbors had that complicated property invasion problem. I think we're going to urgently need professional legal help." Sarah Mitchell was able to see us Monday morning. Her office was in downtown Denver in a modern glass and steel building that inspired professional confidence. She had exactly the type of presence that made you immediately feel safer and more protected. Tall, elegant graying hair in an impeccable bun, and penetrating blue eyes that seemed able to see through any lie or manipulation. We were sitting in her conference room on a sunny morning, 1 week after Mark's direct threats. I had meticulously brought all the documents I could gather. The official police report about the snake, detailed bank statements showing the purchase at the reptile store, digital recordings of the calls where Rebecca confessed the prank, and even some photographs of the mysterious box that David had taken before police took everything as evidence. "Let me confirm if I understand the entire situation correctly," Sarah said, carefully leafing through the papers organized on the table. "Your 32-year-old daughter bought a venomous coral snake using your credit card, sent it to your house, without any sender identification, admitted doing this during a recorded phone call, called the act a prank, and then her husband came to your house making specific, physical threats about knowing your daily routine." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And all this happened after we refused to give her early access to my mother's inheritance." "And you completely cut all financial support after the snake incident?" "Yes. Credit cards, automatic monthly transfers, car payments, absolutely everything permanently canceled." Sarah leaned back in the leather chair, thoughtful and calculating. "The first thing I need to honestly say is that you're dealing with a potentially very dangerous situation. The progressive escalation from emotional blackmail to attempted poisoning to explicit physical threats is genuinely concerning from a legal standpoint." "Do you think they would really do something violent?" David asked directly. "I can't predict future behavior with certainty," Sarah replied honestly, "but I can say the behavioral pattern is absolutely clear. Every time you establish a healthy boundary, they dramatically intensify their response, and now that you've cut off the money, which was essentially their source of power over you, they're desperate and potentially unpredictable." She picked up a golden pen and began making meticulous notes. "Now, in specific legal terms, we have several viable options. Sending the snake through the postal system can be framed as illegal trafficking of dangerous animals, which is a federal crime." "But," I asked anxiously, "but proving specific lethal intent would be extremely difficult in court. Their defense would inevitably be that it was a prank in poor taste, not premeditated attempted murder. What might work better is a completely different legal approach." Sarah stood up and pulled a thick legal book from the impressive bookshelf behind her, beginning to flip through specific pages. "Rebecca bought the snake legally at the store." "Correct. The store had all necessary state licenses." "Yes. I called to confirm all details," I replied. "But," she said, smiling for the first time since we arrived, "sending a live snake through the federal postal system without adequate declaration and specific transport licenses is a completely separate legal matter. Even though she bought the animal legally, transporting it alive by mail without appropriate federal authorizations constitutes illegal trafficking of controlled species." David leaned forward interested. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means we can frame this as a federal crime regardless of alleged intent. The simple act of sending the animal without federal license is sufficient for a solid charge. And with the confessional, recordings admitting the act, we have more than enough evidence." I felt a wave of relief mixed with deep sadness. Relief because there were finally real legal consequences for what Rebecca had done. Sadness because we had reached the absolutely unacceptable point of needing to criminally prosecute my own daughter. "What about the explicit physical threats?" I asked. "The threats are much more legally direct. Criminal intimidation, especially with the detailed specific mention of your daily routine, can be easily framed as terroristic threat. Another solid federal charge." Sarah closed the book and looked at me directly with seriousness. "Margaret, I need to ask something fundamental. Are you genuinely prepared to go all the way with this? Because once we initiate federal legal proceedings, there's no possible return. Your daughter could face real federal prison." The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Was I really prepared to send my own daughter to federal prison? I thought about all the times I had given in to Rebecca's progressively more extreme whims. All the times I invented elaborate excuses for her destructive behavior. All the times I told myself she was just immature or going through a difficult temporary phase. I thought about the coral snake silently moving inside that box, patiently waiting to fatally bite me when I opened what I thought was a loving Mother's Day gift. I thought about Mark's specific threats. The way he had cruelly smiled while describing our vulnerable daily routine, making it crystal clear that he watched us and knew exactly when we were unprotected. "Yes," I said with absolute conviction. "I'm completely prepared," Sarah said pragmatically. "If something happens to you, Rebecca cannot benefit in any way from the crimes she committed against you 2 productive hours later." We left Sarah's office with a comprehensive and detailed legal plan. She would immediately contact the Colorado Department of Wildlife and federal prosecutors. We would install professional residential security cameras and establish rigorous personal safety protocols, and Rebecca would be completely removed from the $350,000 inheritance my mother had left. Kevin, my responsible and stable younger son, would inherit absolutely everything. He had built an independent and prosperous life in California, had never asked us for an unnecessary penny, and maintained a healthy adult relationship with us based on genuine love, not toxic financial dependence. We also created a completely protected educational fund for Ethan and Oliver, which they could access at 18, exclusively for college or professional training. Rebecca and Mark could never touch this money, even if they somehow obtained total legal custody of the boys. Sarah had discovered a crucial loophole in the legal situation. Although the snake had been legally purchased at the licensed Aurora store, the specific act of transporting it alive through the federal postal system without adequate transport license constituted illegal trafficking of dangerous animals according to rigid federal laws. Mark, as an accomplice who helped plan and execute the shipping, possessed no authorization for transporting venomous species. Using federal mail to send live animals without appropriate declaration violated multiple specific federal regulations. The beauty of this approach, Sarah explained, is that we don't need to prove intent to kill. The crime is illegal transport, period. Intent is irrelevant to the charge. Simultaneously, she began structuring a new will, completely removing Rebecca from the inheritance. Considering she demonstrated willingness for violence against you, we cannot allow her to financially benefit from anything that happens. The new will also included specific clauses. If something happened to us under suspicious circumstances, an automatic investigation would be initiated focusing on Rebecca and Mark as primary suspects. All our assets would go to Kevin and the grandchildren's educational fund, with Rebecca permanently excluded. The federal investigation moved faster than I ever expected. Sarah had strategic contacts in the Colorado Department of Wildlife, and when she methodically presented all our evidence, the complete police report, the detailed credit card charge, the digital confessional recordings, and the official account of explicit physical threats, they took the case with absolute seriousness. Apparently, trafficking dangerous animals through the federal postal system was a growing national problem, and the department was genuinely eager to make a public example of someone who had violated regulations so flagrantly. Federal investigator Kevin Thompson, ironically, with the same name as my younger son, came to visit us on a rainy Thursday afternoon. He was a serious and meticulous man in his 40s who took extremely detailed notes of absolutely everything we told him, from the initial confrontation to the physical threats at our door. What impresses me most professionally, he said, closing his notepad after 2 hours of interview, is the evident and indisputable premeditation. The purchase was made specifically 2 days after your family discussion. The shipping was carefully scheduled to arrive exactly on Mother's Day. The ventilation holes demonstrate specific technical knowledge about safe transport of live reptiles. This definitely wasn't an impulsive or emotional act. And the direct physical threats? David asked. The threats completely seal the case, Thompson responded with conviction. They demonstrate a clear pattern of behavioral escalation and intentional intimidation, especially the part about knowing your daily routine in detail. That's textbook criminal intimidation, with specific intent to cause psychological fear. Thompson closed his document folder. We're going to need you to formally identify the suspects through photographs and possibly testify if the case eventually goes to federal trial. Are you genuinely prepared for this responsibility? I looked at David, thinking about the magnitude of what we were about to set in motion, testifying against our own daughter in federal court. 6 months ago, the mere idea would have completely horrified me. But after everything that had happened, after all the lies and manipulations and attempts to harm me, it seemed the only possible way to finally establish that destructive actions had real and inevitable consequences. We're completely prepared, I replied with determination. 3 weeks later, on a cold Tuesday morning, Sarah called me before I even finished my breakfast. They've been arrested, she said without any preamble. I sat heavily in the kitchen chair, even actively waiting for this moment, even knowing it was the just and necessary consequence. Hearing the actual words made me physically sick, both of them together, both simultaneously. Rebecca for illegal trafficking of dangerous animals through federal postal system and threat with potentially lethal substance. Mark for criminal intimidation and terroristic threat. Bail was denied due to documented pattern of behavioral escalation and flight risk. And what happens now? Now they stay in preventive detention until official trial. With the solid evidence we have, especially the unequivocal confessional recordings, it's highly likely their attorneys will recommend accepting a confession agreement to avoid risk of much longer federal sentences. I hung up the phone and sat in the completely silent kitchen for a long time. David was in the garden, still unaware of the news. I should feel victorious or at least deeply relieved, but mostly I felt strangely empty. My eldest daughter was in a federal prison cell. My grandchildren were temporarily without parents, probably confused and scared, being cared for by the other paternal grandparents we barely knew. And I was directly the person responsible for setting this devastating sequence of events in motion. But when I consciously remembered the coral snake silently moving inside that cardboard box, when I remembered Mark's cruel and calculating smile while describing our vulnerable daily routine, I knew with absolute certainty that I had done the only humanly possible thing. Some family bridges need to be permanently burned to protect what really matters. The final plea agreement came 2 months later. Rebecca accepted a sentence of 2.5 years in federal prison for trafficking dangerous animals and threat with lethal substance. Mark received 3 years for criminal intimidation and terroristic threat, as he was legally considered the leader in escalating physical threats. I didn't personally go to see them being sentenced in federal court. Sarah represented me professionally throughout the entire process. 6 months after the arrest, I received a handwritten letter from the Federal Women's Penitentiary. It was from Rebecca. Mom, it said in handwriting I immediately recognized. I know you probably will never be able to genuinely forgive me, and I completely understand that. But I want you to know that I'm finally beginning to understand the real magnitude of what I did. In the mandatory psychological therapy sessions here, I've started to see how my behavior was progressively destructive. How I used you and Dad as emotional and financial crutches throughout my entire adult life. The snake. Jesus. Mom, I could have really killed you. When I think about it now, with a clear mind, without anger and desperation clouding my judgment, I get physically sick. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that the woman who did that isn't really who I want to be, or at least not who I'm working to become. I'm working every day to become someone better. Someone my children can genuinely respect when they grow up. Someone you could be proud to call daughter again, even if that never happens. I sincerely hope you and Dad are happy and safe. You deserve true peace with deep love and genuine remorse, Rebecca. I cried reading the letter. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the mother she could have been to the boys, for the precious years we wasted in a toxic cycle of dependence and emotional manipulation. But I didn't respond to the letter, at least not immediately. Rebecca needed to learn through real experience that genuine change took considerable time and that beautiful words on paper didn't magically erase attempted murder. Maybe one day when she got out of prison and proved through consistent actions, not just words, that she had really fundamentally changed, we could cautiously begin to rebuild some kind of relationship. But it would be a completely different relationship with crystal clear boundaries and real immediate consequences. As for the boys, Ethan and Oliver, they began visiting us again after 6 months of separation. The other paternal grandparents were genuinely decent people who understood that children desperately needed stability and unconditional love, not to be used as emotional weapons in complicated adult wars. We explained to them in terms carefully appropriate for 6-year-olds that Mommy and Daddy had made some very bad choices and needed a long time to learn to make better choices, that sometimes adult people made tremendous mistakes and had to face serious consequences. The boys adapted surprisingly better than I expected. Children are genuinely resilient, and with lots of constant love and emotional stability, they visibly flourished. David and I, we discovered our house was infinitely more peaceful without constant drama and financial manipulation. We returned to traveling regularly, something we hadn't done in years because there was always some fabricated emergency from Rebecca that urgently needed our financial or emotional attention. We reconnected with dear friends we had neglected. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, and I discovered something fundamental about myself that I never knew. I was much stronger and more independent than I had ever imagined. For entire decades, I let Rebecca convince me that I was a terrible mother if I didn't automatically give in to all her whims, that genuine maternal love meant never saying no, never establishing real consequences, always being available to rescue and support regardless of destructive behavior. But true love, healthy and lasting love, sometimes means courageously letting people face the complete consequences of their actions. It means establishing firm boundaries and maintaining them consistently. It means protecting yourself and the people you love from destructive behaviors, even when those behaviors come from someone you love deeply. It took me 58 years to learn this fundamental lesson, but I finally learned it completely.